Thanks a lot. We are living through very interesting times, and that's an understatement, right? We are on day 13 of the Israel Hamas war, and the ground incursion by Israel has not yet commenced. We all know that, in retrospect, that the Hamas has carried out a very carefully planned operation. It's planned militarily well, politically well, and from a humanitarian perspective, it has put its cards, played its cards very well, right? And it's very clear now that militarily, Israel is going to have a tough fight ahead. The question is the Israeli military up to fighting a seasoned Hamas on its own territory? And if it does, when? The second aspect of this is the bombing of the hospital has actually upended the whole war and turned the whole thing on its head. Whether it's intended or not, who's to blame is a matter which will, continue uh, to be decided in future. But the fact is that the entire West Asia is in a turmoil, and the larger global geopolitics has also gone into a turmoil. If I may say so, this is a kaleidoscope, which is, the West Asian politics is turning in one direction, the global geopolitics is turning in another direction. And we're going to talk of far reaching consequences. Actually, the question in front of me is, how do you see the present? How do you see the immediate future? And the far reaching consequences are the next step further. So we'll see this from three perspectives. The first perspective is the West Asian perspective, the security issues, the military issues, and what's happening on the Israel Hamas front, which I'll request General Hasnain to cover. Following that, we'll have a view from Dr. Michael Rubin as to what's the international perspective and how are things being seen, from outside, from the West. And then I'll request Ambassador Trigunai to take a perspective which is a diplomatic perspective, largely from the Indian perspective. I say, look, what is our stake in it? How does it matter? How does it affect all of us? And so on and so forth, right? Each of you could, take about 10 to 12 minutes. When your 10 minutes are getting over, I'll give you a nudge. At the outset, I'd like to request General Hasnain. Sir, over to you for the West Asian perspective.
Thank you, General Shankar. Thank you very much. Good evening. Jai Hind. Good morning, Dr. Michael Rubin. All friends across on Kata and on Gunner's Shop. 10 minutes is 12 minutes. Sufficient. This is exactly what we want. Crisp thoughts and ideas at this particular moment. I'm in very august company. I realize this. I mean, to be a part of a panel as rich and as strong as this would be a dream, absolutely. Let me start straight away. I'm tempted to say this. I have to say it. I started my career in current affairs on the 1st of June, 1967. As a youngster, class 9 or class 8 or 9 maybe, the war was breaking out. The Gulf of Aqaba was under threat. It had been closed off for Israeli shipping. The port of Eilat was virtually sealed, and I was lost as to what really is happening. So I went to my history teacher with a map and asked him to explain to me what exactly was happening there. 4 days later, the 6-day war started, and ever since then, one has followed the politics of West Asia stroke the Middle East. Now, it's been getting more complex every year. Fortunately, I don't have to go back to my history teachers, but I do find people like Ambassador Anil Trigunayat are always available. You can always go back to them. They will teach you a lot of things from their hands-on experience that they've had in the Middle East and West Asia. I will cover 4 or 5 things. The intelligence failure, which is drawing a lot of interest, the war effort, the geopolitics involved, and if I have time, I'll look at some lessons. All these are interconnected, and we are aware of that. Now, on the aspect of intelligence failure, which is the start point, the belief that there will be no war, lulling your adversary into believing there's no war. That is the prime point to start with. Hamas, let it be known virtually, almost on the lines of 1973, when the Yom Kippur War started, that they were in no position to go to war. It was all a question of technology, versus human intelligence. The Israelis now depended tremendously on technical intelligence. They've gone overboard on this whole aspect of Israeli technology and the manner in which it works, drone warfare, there's that, etc. No doubt, we are living in this age. We have to be, but you cannot forget human intelligence, which is perhaps one of the most essential elements of the intelligence cycle. I call it fodder versus reality. Fodder, if you've been seeing the serial Fodder, you will realize that all that you're speaking of has been happening there. It's been shown to you by filmmakers in Israel. The tunnels, the manner in which special forces go in, carry out strikes, surgical strikes at various centers and things like that. All this has been known. It's surprising at the end of it, if the filmmakers in Israel knew it, how come the IDF did not know all this? All this, of course, is in the eye of the radar. There's no doubt about it. Warnings which were given out by Egypt, the United States, have been ignored. Too much of political activity in a nation obviously leads to this. And the kind of unity, national unity, which Israel had is something of the past. Today, the manner in which it has been obsessed with the politics, for example, the whole aspect of the legal issues, the constitutional legal issues on law, etc., have come to a degree of obsession with people. And therefore, everyone took their eyes off the radar. So there's some of the very, very important issues concerning intelligence. One thing which we will have to remember, Israel's victories of the past, there are 4 victories, to be precise, for 1948, 1967, 1973, 1982, the Bekaa Valley also I count it as a victory. Now, these victories have all been military victories. They have never been converted to a strategic victory. The ability to convert a military victory into a strategic victory is a great challenge. It requires a tremendous amount of diplomacy, it requires a tremendous amount of statesmanship, and we all understand. Coming to the war, initiation by Hamas was outstanding, no doubt about it. Took a leaf out of the ISIS book, a leaf out of 1973, and that is how the initiation was done. The prime purpose, to my mind, was the spark to make sure that the world, instead of looking at Ukraine and Indo-Pacific, came back to look at West Asia and the Middle East. They had no regret about casualties. Now, the moment you start having that kind of an outlook, where you have no regrets and no remorse about your own casualties or your adversary's casualties, then you can go to hell and back. Now, that is the kind of approach which Hamas has followed and which is going to be one of the major factors as the war progresses. The Hamas aim, obviously, was primarily the spark. But whether they can take this beyond is a $1 million question. It's happened so many times in the Middle East where the Arabs have been able to sort of make the initial dent, but subsequently have never been able to take it forward, carry it forward to a strategic victory. As far as Israel is concerned, one last point on the aspect from Palestine, from the angle of the Hamas. When it has sent out a message that it is delirious, there's a set of madmen who are probably planning this entire thing and executing it. Now, the moment you start dealing with such men, irrationality comes into it. War fighting becomes a huge issue. War fighting becomes a different challenge. Israel has been more used to a benign kind of a Arab response all this time. Politically embarrassed, and the moment a nation is politically embarrassed, a state, a government is politically embarrassed, the response is something very different. There is no government of consensus today. It's an emergency government which has been formed. So it's not a national unity government as such, which a lot of people are speaking about. Retribution is something which everyone is demanding. There is tremendous public pressure. So there's no way that you can look at any compromise at this stage, which is what I was discussing right at the beginning before we became public. This retribution has to be there. There's immense public pressure and political embarrassment, which is combining and driving this entire thing. This is not a conventional war. It is a hybrid war. And now this $1 million question of going in with a 300,000 force, mobilized force, waiting to go to war. Who do you go to war with? Do you go to war with the people of Palestine? Do you go to war with the Hamas? Do you go to war with the Hezbollah? Israel has to be very careful now as to select its objectives and select the enemy. Who exactly is the enemy in this entire game? And the problem is that the moment you are responding from a position of weakness, the moment you are under political pressure, your ability to comprehend and ability to determine your objectives becomes that much more difficult. How achievable is a war success in this case? Well, in the case of Israel, everything is achievable. We know that Israel is capable of achieving a lot of things. We know that Israel can be very unconventional, but the problem is in this particular situation is no straight strategy, tactics, anything is really going to work out because the Hamas has probably got something up its sleeve which is going to work on. Therefore, the combination of tank forces getting into urban warfare, infantry, anti-tank infantry tank teams together, etc. All this is there. But will it work? Will it work in an environment where North Gaza has been vacated, more or less vacated, but the Hamas is still holding a lot of hostages, Israeli hostages, and probably many civilian hostages among the Palestinians themselves? At some point, Israel may have to reconsider the whole policy of casualties, its own and that of Palestine. Remember, the last time Israel went to war in Gaza, in the early stages, it said they lost 66 killed and over 200 wounded. For a country of that size, for an army of that size, 66 killed in phase one of a war is tremendous. Something is not something which can be easily absorbed by a nation. So this has to be kept in mind. Of course, there are a lot of things which will happen: drones, tanks, infantry, artillery, rockets, all that small teams put together. Will it finally lead to the objective of destroying Hamas? To my mind, very, very difficult. Very, very difficult. You will have to occupy Gaza, and this is something the Americans have been advising against. The occupation of Gaza, the moment you occupy it, is going to be a severe challenge. My last 2-3 points in the last 2-3 minutes that I have, this is very akin to what happened in Jaffna. If you remember, we take your minds back to 1987, urban warfare. The Indian Army exposed for the first time, trying to get into Jaffna town, multiple thrust lines. And what did we find? Immediately, the LTT used the simplest of things, IEDs, against us, right? And put us back by a couple of days as far as our success was concerned. We lost 550 dead in that campaign. It started with a disastrous Helibon campaign, if I may just remind you. Now, the last 1 or 2 issues, the bombing of the hospital, at the moment almost irrelevant. With the kind of casualties we have seen, 500 dead in this, it seems to be acceptable to everyone, and no one is really going overboard about talking about this. Therefore, the humanitarian angle in this war, to my mind, is going to be something which is going to be secondary, at least at the beginning. As we go along, hopefully, mankind will come together again and start sensitizing people about it, and you'll find more nations probably giving advisories to Israel. As far as India is concerned, we need not give any advisory to Israel at all. I think we have been very correct in our response. Our response has been from the Prime Minister right at the beginning, which was the condemnation of terrorism, which was contextual to the first act which the Hamas did. The second aspect which the MEA has gone into has been our traditional stance, from which we have not dithered at all. So India still remains where it is. And we are in a position to perhaps intervene at some time, and I'm sure Ambassador Anil Trigunath will speak about it. He's written extensively about it. I fully endorse that. India does have the potential of playing perhaps a major role in league with some others. There will be geopolitical effects, which I'm sure Dr. Michael Rubin will cover very extensively. So with my time perhaps probably already over, I don't want to go overboard more than that at the moment. We are on the 13th day. I anticipate even on the 25th day, we will be discussing almost the same thing. There may not be many major outcomes even by that day. Thank you very much. I'll rest my case there.
Thanks a lot, sir. Thanks a lot for what you said. I think you made a lot of good points. I'll highlight a few. First, nations which believe that there will be no war are destined to face war. That's the first lesson which we have to take into account. The second thing is the best technology is that technology which works on the battlefield, and it's not necessarily the latest technology, right? And third, the political disarray in Israel is costing it more than the military competence of the nation. And of course, we have entered a state of permanent hybrid war, and we've learnt it in Ukraine, and we're seeing it here. And the next war, which India faces, or if it happens in the South China Sea also, is going to be a hybrid war and nothing more. And in this kind of hybrid war, where non-state actors are going to get involved, casualties have lost their value. In fact, the chip of a non-state actor, the political chip of a non-state actor is casualties. And that's there for this thing. And of course, you did mention that Israel faces the problems which we faced in Jaffna. I dare say they'll also face the same problems the Americans faced in Fallujah, and that's quite recent, and the Americans fully know well about it. Right. Thanks a lot, sir. That was quite incisive the